"You're not walking into a room built for billionaires," the head of security said loud enough for every guest beneath the crystal chandeliers to hear, and for a heartbeat the elegant marble lobby of the Hawthorne Grand Auction House became quieter than a church on Sunday morning. Every conversation stopped. Every polished shoe seemed frozen against the imported Italian stone floor. Marcus Ellington stood without moving, dressed in a plain black polo, dark blue jeans, and clean sneakers that looked far too ordinary for an invitation-only auction where private jets filled the nearby executive terminal and rare masterpieces routinely sold for more than entire neighborhoods. He carried no designer briefcase, wore no luxury watch, and arrived without a chauffeur, an assistant, or a security detail. Instead, he held a single matte black envelope in one hand as if it contained nothing more important than ordinary paperwork. The guard, Ethan Brooks, folded his arms with the confidence of a man who believed appearances never lied. "Invitation," he demanded. Marcus calmly handed him the envelope. Ethan barely glanced inside before giving a dismissive smile. "Nice print job," he muttered. "You're wasting everyone's time." Several wealthy guests walking toward the entrance slowed just enough to watch. One elderly collector whispered to his wife. A venture capitalist in an expensive navy suit smirked before continuing toward the registration desk. Another guest quietly lifted a phone, sensing something unusual unfolding before the first auction bell had even sounded. Marcus simply watched the enormous bronze doors leading into the ballroom. Beyond them waited one of the most exclusive auctions in America, where fortunes changed with the fall of a wooden gavel and reputations were built in seconds. He had spent years hearing stories about tonight's event, but not because he dreamed of attending. He had helped make it possible. None of the people studying his clothes knew that. None of them recognized the quiet confidence in his eyes or understood why he seemed almost completely unaffected by the embarrassment unfolding around him. Ethan took one step closer. "Sir, I'm asking you to leave before this becomes uncomfortable." Marcus looked at him for a long moment before answering in a voice so calm it somehow carried farther than the guard's raised tone. "Is denying people at the door your policy, or only the ones who don't fit your expectations?" The question lingered in the air. Ethan laughed once, short and cold. "People who belong here don't need to ask questions." Behind the reception desk, auction manager Olivia Bennett glanced toward the entrance after hearing the exchange. She walked over with practiced confidence, accepted the invitation from Ethan, studied it for less than 3 seconds, and handed it back without scanning a single barcode. "I'm sorry," she said, though her expression carried no apology at all. "This event is reserved for verified bidders and invited patrons. You'll have to leave." Marcus accepted the envelope without argument, slipped it beneath his arm, and looked past both of them toward the towering ballroom doors as the distant sound of the opening gavel echoed faintly through the building. The auction had officially begun, but the most valuable bid of the night had not yet arrived. Marcus Ellington remained exactly where he was, neither stepping forward nor backing away, while another wave of guests crossed the polished lobby toward the ballroom as though nothing unusual had happened. The distant rhythm of conversation, the soft notes of a live string quartet, and the occasional sound of champagne glasses meeting in quiet celebration drifted through the partially open doors, reminding everyone outside that the evening's most exclusive gathering had already begun. Olivia Bennett folded her hands neatly in front of her blazer and offered the kind of practiced smile that looked courteous from across the room but carried no warmth at all. "Sir, there is no reason to prolong this. If your invitation were legitimate, you would already be inside." Marcus looked at the invitation once before sliding it back into the matte black envelope. "Interesting," he replied. "You reached that conclusion without verifying a single detail." Olivia's expression hardened for only a fraction of a second before returning to polished confidence. "Experience usually tells us everything we need to know." Ethan Brooks nodded in agreement, convinced the conversation had already ended. Guests continued walking past them, some pretending not to stare while others openly glanced toward Marcus before disappearing into the ballroom. One middle-aged investor quietly whispered, "Someone should tell him this is not a public event." Another guest chuckled without slowing his pace. Marcus heard every word but offered no response. His attention shifted instead to the enormous digital display mounted beside the registration desk, where photographs of tonight's featured collection slowly faded from one masterpiece to another. Historic manuscripts, rare automobiles, sculptures, original paintings, and one final confidential acquisition remained hidden beneath a simple message that read, "Final presentation reserved for authorized bidders." His eyes rested there just long enough for Ethan to notice. "You can stop looking," the guard said. "You are never getting through those doors." Marcus answered with the same steady composure that had unsettled people long before tonight. Sometimes the people standing outside understand the room better than the people already inside. Nearby, a young registration assistant named Emily Carter quietly continued checking arriving guests into the system. She had tried not to listen, but the conversation had become impossible to ignore. As Olivia returned toward the reception desk, Emily noticed the discarded verification screen still waiting on the computer monitor. Out of simple curiosity, she typed the name she had overheard only moments earlier. Marcus Ellington. The system paused for less than a second before several authorization banners immediately appeared across the screen. Executive clearance. Founder circle. Lifetime principal bidder. Administrative verification required. Emily blinked twice, believing she had entered the wrong name. She searched again, more carefully this time. The exact same result appeared, accompanied by an internal security note instructing staff to notify executive administration immediately upon arrival. Her heartbeat quickened. She looked toward Marcus standing calmly near the entrance, then back toward Olivia, who was already greeting another wealthy guest with effortless enthusiasm. Emily took one cautious step away from her workstation. "Ms. Bennett," she began softly. Olivia barely turned her head. "Not now." Emily hesitated, glancing once more at the screen before speaking again. "I think there may have been a mistake." Olivia sighed impatiently. "The only mistake would be allowing distractions while our highest-profile clients are arriving." Emily slowly lowered her voice, but uncertainty remained written across her face. She looked back at Marcus, who stood quietly watching the ballroom doors as though he knew something no one else had yet discovered, while somewhere beyond those doors another auction lot sold for millions of dollars and the evening continued without realizing its most important bidder was still waiting outside. Emily Carter could not pull her eyes away from the glowing verification screen. The authorization banners remained unchanged, bright against the dark monitor as if daring someone else to notice them. Executive clearance. Founder circle. Lifetime principal bidder. Administrative verification required. She quietly refreshed the record a third time, expecting the system to correct itself, but every result became even more detailed. A confidential profile icon appeared beside Marcus Ellington's name along with a security notice restricting access to senior administration only. Emily felt a knot form in her stomach. She looked toward Olivia Bennett again, but the manager was busy welcoming a famous real estate developer with a smile that seemed effortless. Ethan Brooks stood near the entrance with his arms crossed, satisfied that he had protected the exclusivity of the evening. Neither of them realized the computer only a few feet away was telling a completely different story. Emily gathered enough courage to approach Olivia once more. "Ms. Bennett, I really think you should verify this profile before asking him to leave." Olivia barely looked up from the guest list. "Emily, tonight is not the night to question my judgment. But his account is marked at the highest authorization level." Olivia exhaled impatiently. Computers can be wrong. Experience is usually not. Ethan overheard the conversation and laughed softly. "If every person with a fake invitation could confuse the system, we would never finish checking people in." Several nearby guests smiled in agreement. One older businessman adjusted his tuxedo cufflinks before saying, "Confidence is free. Membership is not." A younger venture capitalist standing beside him chuckled. He probably wandered over after seeing expensive cars outside. The comments drifted across the marble lobby with casual certainty, each one landing a little heavier than the last. Marcus heard every sentence without changing his expression. He remained focused on the ballroom doors where another round of applause echoed through the building as another masterpiece found a new owner. It sounded almost like a distant clock counting down. A social media content creator named Ryan Collins, invited by one of the auction sponsors, quietly lifted his phone and began recording the exchange from across the lobby. He whispered to the friend beside him, "Something about this does not feel right." His friend shrugged. "Maybe security knows something we do not." Ryan kept recording anyway. There was something unusual about the calm man standing alone while everyone around him seemed determined to prove he did not belong. Marcus finally reached into his pocket and removed his phone. He looked at the screen for only a moment before placing a brief call. The person answered immediately. "Good evening, Mr. Ellington." "Stay available," Marcus said in the same measured voice he had used all evening. "Do not intervene yet." "Understood," came the reply without another question. Marcus ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Ethan noticed the conversation and smirked. "Calling someone to pick you up?" Marcus looked at him with quiet confidence. "No. I am making sure everyone arrives exactly when they are needed." Ethan shook his head, convinced he was listening to empty words. Emily, however, watched Marcus more carefully than before. Nothing about his voice suggested desperation. Nothing about his posture suggested defeat. If anything, he looked like a man patiently waiting for a meeting that had simply started without him. Inside the ballroom, the auctioneer announced that only one featured collection remained before the confidential final presentation. The applause grew louder, the anticipation inside intensified, and without realizing it, nearly everyone in the lobby had stopped watching the entrance and started watching Marcus instead. Emily Carter knew she had reached the point where staying silent no longer felt professional. She returned to her workstation, opened the confidential profile once more, and this time selected the internal verification history. A series of restricted notices appeared across the screen, each carrying a higher authorization level than the last. The profile had not been created yesterday or even last month. It had existed for years, complete with executive approval records, private bidding credentials, and permanent founder circle recognition. One final line caught her attention more than anything else. In bold letters it read, "Immediate notification required upon arrival." Emily slowly looked up from the monitor and back toward Marcus Ellington. He had not moved. He stood with the same quiet patience, holding the matte black envelope beneath one arm while the sounds of another successful multi-million-dollar sale echoed through the ballroom. The contrast unsettled her. The system treated him like one of the most important people connected to the auction, while everyone around her treated him like someone who had wandered into the wrong building. She took a deep breath and walked directly toward Olivia Bennett again. "Please look at this before anything else happens," she said, carefully turning the monitor toward her manager. Olivia barely gave the screen more than a passing glance before shaking her head. "Close it." Emily hesitated. "But the profile is verified." Olivia lowered her voice. "Emily, I hired you because you follow procedures, not because you second-guess them. Following procedure is exactly why I am asking you to read it." Olivia's smile disappeared. "The conversation is over." Ethan Brooks stepped closer after noticing the exchange. "Is there a problem?" Olivia answered before Emily could speak. "Nothing important. Just a new employee who still trusts computers more than experience." Ethan nodded confidently. "Experience tells me exactly who belongs at an event like this." Marcus calmly met his eyes. "Experience can teach wisdom. It can also reinforce assumptions." Ethan dismissed the remark with a shrug. "Tonight I will trust my instincts." Nearby, Ryan Collins continued recording without saying a word. He noticed something everyone else seemed to ignore. Emily was no longer defending a stranger. She was defending the information directly in front of her. Another guest, an elderly woman wearing an elegant silver evening gown, quietly approached the registration desk after overhearing enough of the conversation to grow curious. She looked toward Emily and asked softly, "Young lady, Is there actually something wrong with his invitation? Emily answered honestly. No, ma'am. I do not believe the invitation is the problem. Olivia immediately interrupted. Everything is under control. The woman glanced toward Marcus for a long moment before returning to the ballroom without another word, though uncertainty remained written across her face. Emily watched her leave and realized something had changed inside the lobby. The whispers were no longer entirely against Marcus. Doubt had begun moving through the crowd, one quiet conversation at a time. Marcus checked the time on his phone before slipping it back into his pocket. Less than 20 minutes had passed since he first arrived, yet the atmosphere felt completely different. The room was no longer united by certainty. It was divided by questions. Emily returned to the computer one final time and quietly printed the confidential verification page, folding it carefully before walking away from the desk. She no longer intended to convince Olivia Bennet. She intended to preserve the truth before someone found a way to ignore it. Across the lobby, Marcus noticed the folded document in her hand and gave the slightest nod of appreciation. Emily understood immediately. For the first time that evening, she realized the calm man waiting outside the ballroom was not hoping someone would believe him. He was patiently allowing everyone else the opportunity to reveal exactly who they were before the truth walked through the door on its own. The quiet uncertainty spreading through the lobby lasted only a few moments before Olivia Bennet decided to end it herself. She walked back toward Marcus Ellington with measured confidence, stopping only a few feet away as the next wave of distinguished guests entered through the revolving doors. This discussion has gone on long enough, she said. Whether you believe it or not, you are preventing our event from operating smoothly. I am asking you one final time to leave the property. Marcus looked at the ballroom entrance where another burst of applause rolled through the building like distant thunder before returning his attention to Olivia. You still have time to verify the facts, he answered. Facts do not change because they are inconvenient. Ethan Brooks stepped beside her, his posture firm but controlled. He extended one open hand toward the front entrance. Sir, the exit is this way. Marcus glanced briefly at the gesture but remained exactly where he stood. There was no anger in his expression, only patience that somehow unsettled the people watching more than any argument could have. Ryan Collins quietly lowered his phone for a moment and whispered, "Why does he look like he already knows how this ends?" His friend did not answer. Even the guests who had laughed earlier had stopped smiling. Something about Marcus's composure refused to fit the story everyone else had already decided was true. Emily Carter held the folded verification document tightly against her side, unsure whether to step forward again or remain silent. She watched Olivia refuse to look at the evidence for a second time and realized the decision had nothing to do with the invitation anymore. It had become about pride. Marcus slowly closed his eyes for a brief moment, and an old memory surfaced with remarkable clarity. 24 years earlier he had stood outside a prestigious charity art auction in Boston wearing his only suit after saving for months to purchase a single ticket. The receptionist had looked at him, then at the line of elegantly dressed guests behind him, before politely explaining that there had been a mistake. She never checked the reservation list. She never asked for identification. She simply assumed he did not belong. Marcus remembered standing on the sidewalk that evening watching expensive cars disappear one by one, promising himself that if success ever found him, he would never allow appearance to become the measure of dignity. That promise had guided every company he built and every investment he made. The memory faded as quickly as it had arrived. He opened his eyes and found himself standing before another set of closed doors, hearing almost the same words from different faces. Olivia crossed her arms. Silence is not going to change the outcome. Marcus answered quietly, no. But it often reveals the character of the people speaking. Those nearby fell silent again. Even Ethan hesitated before replying. The sentence seemed to hang in the marble lobby longer than anyone expected. Emily finally took one careful step forward, raising the folded verification page. Please, she said, her voice steady despite the pressure surrounding her. Before anyone makes another decision, read this. Olivia did not even reach for the paper. Put it away. Emily remained frozen, the document still extended between them. At that exact moment the ballroom lights dimmed slightly, signaling the beginning of the confidential final presentation. A deep voice echoed through the building's sound system. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now preparing for the final acquisition of the evening. Our last authorized bidder will be joining us shortly. Marcus looked toward the closed ballroom doors once more, checked the time, and a faint, almost invisible smile appeared for the first time that evening, as though he had been waiting not for permission to enter, but for the auction itself to finally be ready for him. The announcement echoed through every corner of the building, and the atmosphere shifted almost instantly. Guests inside the ballroom lowered their voices while those still standing in the lobby turned toward the towering doors with renewed curiosity. The confidential final presentation had always been surrounded by rumors. Some believed it would determine the future ownership of a legendary private collection. Others whispered that whoever secured the final acquisition would quietly reshape one of the most influential investment circles in America. Marcus Ellington listened without reacting. The excitement surrounding him belonged to everyone else. For him, the evening was proceeding exactly on schedule. He reached into his pocket, unlocked his phone, and opened a secure contact labeled simply Sophia. The call connected before the first ring could finish. "Good evening, Mr. Ellington," came the calm voice on the other end. "Release authorization," Marcus said. "Nothing more. No explanation. No emotion." Sophia answered immediately. "Authorization confirmed. Executive protocol is now active." The call ended. Marcus slipped the phone back into his pocket as though he had merely checked the weather. Ethan Brooks watched the exchange with open amusement. "That is it?" he asked. "One phone call is supposed to change something?" Marcus met his eyes. "You will know soon enough." Olivia Bennett folded her arms tighter. "No executive protocol exists that can override admission requirements." Emily Carter quietly looked between Marcus and the computer screen. Before she could say anything, the monitor suddenly refreshed on its own. New notifications appeared across the system one after another. Executive access synchronization in progress. Board authorization updating. Final bidder verification pending. Emily stared in disbelief. She had never seen the software behave that way before. Across the registration desk another employee noticed the same messages appearing on a second terminal. "What is happening?" he asked quietly. Olivia walked toward the computer and frowned. "Probably a routine system update." Emily shook her head. "Routine updates do not trigger executive authorization." Ryan Collins captured the entire moment on his phone. Even he could sense the lobby had begun changing in ways no one fully understood. The conversations that had once centered on Marcus's appearance were now centered on the computers. A pair of financial executives standing nearby exchanged uneasy glances. One whispered, "Why would the executive server activate during an auction?" The other answered honestly, "It usually happens only when someone with extraordinary authorization checks in." Olivia immediately dismissed the comment. Coincidence? Yet her confidence sounded thinner than before. Marcus remained perfectly still while another notification appeared across every registration monitor at exactly the same time. Await final confirmation before concluding final bid sequence. Emily slowly looked toward Marcus again. The words on the screen matched the timing of his phone call almost exactly. She unfolded the verification page she had printed earlier and compared every detail. Nothing conflicted. Everything pointed in the same direction. Ethan stepped closer to Marcus one final time. "I do not know who you think you are impressing." Marcus answered with the same measured calm that had unsettled everyone since he arrived. "I am not trying to impress anyone. I am allowing the process to reach the truth on its own." Before Ethan could respond, every light surrounding the registration desk briefly dimmed and returned to full brightness. A clear electronic tone sounded through the lobby as the digital display beside the ballroom doors changed. The gallery of artwork disappeared. In its place appeared only a simple message in elegant gold lettering. Final bidder authentication in progress. Please stand by. The entire lobby fell silent. Nobody laughed. Nobody whispered. Every pair of eyes shifted from the screen to Marcus Ellington, who stood with quiet confidence beneath the crystal chandeliers, as though he had known from the beginning that the building itself would soon speak louder than anyone standing inside it. The electronic tone faded, but the silence it left behind felt even louder. Every conversation in the lobby dissolved as the digital display flickered once more. The gold letters disappeared and were replaced by a single line that stretched across the enormous screen. Final bidder verified. Preparing executive access. Olivia Bennett stared at the display as though the words belonged to another building. Ethan Brooks instinctively looked toward the registration terminals, expecting someone to dismiss the notification as another technical error, but every monitor displayed the exact same confirmation. Emily Carter slowly stepped back from the desk, her folded verification document no longer necessary because the system itself had become the witness. Inside the ballroom, the auctioneer's confident voice echoed through the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, before we present the final acquisition of the evening, we are waiting for the arrival of our principal bidder. Hundreds of distinguished guests turned toward the ballroom entrance. The massive double doors remained closed for only another few seconds before a member of the executive operations team hurried across the marble floor from the opposite hallway. He wore a discreet black suit with a gold credentials badge that granted unrestricted access throughout the building. He stopped at the registration desk, glanced at the glowing monitors, and immediately looked toward Marcus Ellington. His expression changed from routine professionalism to unmistakable recognition. "Mr. Ellington," he said respectfully, "we have been searching for you." The sentence landed in the lobby like the final note of a symphony. Ethan blinked once. Olivia's confident posture disappeared almost instantly. Ryan Collins lowered his phone just enough to process what he had heard before raising it again. The executive continued speaking. "The board has confirmed your authorization. The auction cannot proceed without your participation." Marcus nodded politely. "I was aware." The executive looked toward Olivia and Ethan without raising his voice. "Why has Mr. Ellington not been escorted inside?" Neither of them answered. Emily quietly closed her eyes for a brief moment, relieved that the truth no longer depended on her words alone. Marcus calmly reached into the matte black envelope and removed a slim platinum bidding credential embossed with his full name. He handed it to the executive, who examined it for less than a second before returning it with both hands. "Everything is exactly as expected, sir." The ballroom doors slowly opened, revealing rows of collectors, investors, philanthropists, and business leaders waiting beneath brilliant crystal chandeliers. Every head turned toward the entrance as Marcus stepped forward with the same quiet confidence he had displayed since arriving. The auctioneer smiled the moment he saw him. "Our final bidder has arrived." A massive screen behind the stage illuminated with the words "Principal Bidder Confirmed," and directly beneath them appeared a single name. Marcus Ellington. A wave of astonishment swept through the ballroom. Some guests recognized him immediately. Others reached for their programs, suddenly connecting the name with the business empire they had only discussed in magazines and financial journals. Marcus stopped only long enough to look back at Olivia and Ethan. His voice remained calm, steady, and impossible to misunderstand. "You believed I did not belong because you judged the person before verifying the facts. That was never a reflection of me. It was a reflection of your standards." No one responded. There was nothing left to argue. The room itself had already delivered the answer. As Marcus walked toward the front row reserved in his name, the auctioneer lifted the polished wooden gavel once again, smiled toward the audience, and announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, we may now begin the most important bid of the evening." The ballroom seemed to hold its breath as Marcus Ellington took his reserved seat in the front row. Every whisper that had filled the room only moments earlier disappeared beneath the quiet authority of his presence. The auctioneer smiled with genuine relief before raising the polished wooden gavel once again. "Thank you for your patience, ladies and gentlemen. We will now proceed with the final acquisition of the evening." A velvet curtain slowly lifted behind the stage, revealing the confidential offering that had remained hidden throughout the night. It was not simply a historic collection. It represented controlling ownership of the Hawthorne Legacy Investment Trust, an organization whose charitable endowment, cultural partnerships, and investment influence reached across the country. The room immediately understood why only a select group of bidders had been invited. The opening figure appeared on the massive display, and the first bids arrived within seconds. Wealthy collectors raised their numbered paddles with practiced confidence while financial representatives quietly submitted electronic offers from private tables. The numbers climbed rapidly, each increase drawing respectful murmurs from the audience. Marcus remained perfectly still, watching the display without the slightest hint of urgency. Several bidders glanced toward him, wondering when he would finally participate. The auctioneer acknowledged another offer before looking directly toward Marcus. "Mr. Ellington?" Marcus calmly lifted his bidding credential. "Add $20 million. The ballroom fell silent before erupting into astonished whispers. The new figure immediately appeared on the screen, moving far beyond the previous offer. Another bidder hesitated before responding with a smaller increase, only for Marcus to answer again in the same composed voice. "Add another $25 million. The room no longer reacted with excitement. It reacted with disbelief. One by one, the remaining bidders quietly lowered their paddles. They recognized what had become obvious. Marcus was not chasing the acquisition. He had arrived fully prepared to secure it. The auctioneer scanned the room one final time. Any additional bids? No paddle moved. Going once. Silence. Going twice. Every eye remained fixed on Marcus. The polished gavel descended with a sharp, unmistakable sound. Sold. Applause spread across the ballroom, beginning with a handful of guests before growing into a standing ovation from nearly everyone present. The chairman of the auction board walked onto the stage carrying a leather portfolio. Instead of presenting it immediately, he addressed the audience. "Many of you know Mr. Ellington as an investor. Fewer know that more than a decade ago he became the largest private benefactor responsible for preserving this institution. Without his support, this auction house would not exist in its present form." A wave of stunned realization moved through the room. The chairman continued, "Tonight's acquisition completes an agreement negotiated months ago. Effective immediately, Mr. Ellington assumes controlling authority over the Hawthorne Legacy Investment Trust and its executive operations." At that exact moment, several members of the executive administration quietly approached Olivia Bennett and Ethan Brooks near the entrance. Their identification badges stopped displaying active authorization, replaced by temporary review status pending administrative investigation. No raised voices followed. No public argument unfolded. Professionalism remained intact, but the message was unmistakable. Their access to operational responsibilities had been suspended while the evening's events were formally reviewed under organizational policy. Emily Carter noticed her own terminal refresh once more. A new notification appeared across the screen. Incident documentation secured. Employee cooperation acknowledged. She slowly smiled for the first time that evening. Ryan Collins lowered his phone, realizing he had not simply recorded an unforgettable auction. He had witnessed the quiet collapse of assumptions that had seemed unshakable only an hour earlier, all because one man had refused to surrender his dignity when others refused to recognize it. The applause gradually faded, but the feeling inside the ballroom did not. It settled over the audience like a quiet truth that could no longer be ignored. Marcus Ellington accepted the leather portfolio from the chairman with a simple handshake before turning toward the hundreds of guests who had witnessed the evening unfold from uncertainty to unmistakable clarity. He did not celebrate. He did not boast. He simply stood with the same calm dignity he had carried from the moment he was stopped outside the entrance. Olivia Bennett and Ethan Brooks remained near the ballroom doors, no longer surrounded by certainty but by reflection. The executive review team spoke with them respectfully, documenting the sequence of events exactly as it had occurred. Emily Carter quietly provided the printed verification record she had protected throughout the evening, along with the system logs showing every authorization that had appeared long before Marcus entered the ballroom. The chairman accepted the documents with appreciation. Integrity is not only measured by leadership, he told her. It is also measured by the courage to speak when it would be easier to remain silent. Emily smiled modestly, realizing she had simply chosen to trust facts over assumptions. Across the room, several guests who had watched the confrontation in the lobby slowly approached Marcus one by one. An elderly collector extended his hand first. "I owe you an apology," he admitted. "I assumed the people at the door knew better than I did." Marcus shook his hand warmly. "Most people do not intend to judge unfairly. The important part is deciding what to do once the truth becomes clear." Another guest confessed that he had almost walked past without questioning what he had seen. Marcus answered with the same grace. "Silence protects assumptions. Questions protect fairness." Ryan Collins finished recording and lowered his phone for the final time. He realized the most powerful moment of the evening had not been the winning bid or the standing ovation. It had been watching a man refuse to surrender his composure while everyone else rushed to conclusions. That was the story people would remember. Before leaving the stage, the chairman invited Marcus to address the audience. Marcus looked around the ballroom, his eyes moving from the front row to the back, then briefly toward the entrance where the evening had begun. "Tonight was never about proving that I belonged in this room," he said. "It was about revealing how easily dignity can be denied when people replace facts with assumptions." The room remained perfectly silent. A closed door does not determine a person's worth. The people standing beside that door determine their own character by the choices they make. Several guests nodded quietly. Others lowered their eyes, reflecting on the events they had witnessed. Marcus continued, "Success should never become permission to look down on someone else, and humility should never be mistaken for weakness. Every person deserves to be treated with respect before they are measured by appearance, clothing, or status." No one applauded immediately because no one wanted to interrupt the moment. When the applause finally returned, it was slower, deeper, and more sincere than before. Marcus thanked the chairman, greeted several staff members personally, including Emily, and walked toward the ballroom exit without an entourage, without celebration, and without changing the quiet confidence that had carried him through the entire evening. As the crystal lights reflected across the polished marble floor, the final sound heard inside the Hawthorne Grand Auction House was not another bid or another speech. It was the gentle echo of the auction gavel being placed back onto its stand, followed by the lasting reminder that true value is never determined by the first impression someone chooses to make, but by the integrity they reveal when the truth finally arrives.